All right, I think we're live. Welcome, everybody. My name's Scott Maier. This is our Drawing Together art party. So this special event celebrating drawing, celebrating the surpassing 100 episodes of the show. And today I'm bringing some special guests, some of my favorite artists, people who I really admire, both the work as well as kind of the outlook on drawing that I think really aligns with our approach to art making here with the show. So I want to welcome everybody. We have a lot of people attending. So this is our first time doing it via Zoom. So if you're watching on YouTube, you're going to notice the chat has been turned off. So there may still be time if you want to follow the link there to join in on the Zoom event on artistnetwork.com. But those of you who are viewing via Zoom can watch and interact with us on the chat. So there are two features there. If you want to use the chat to communicate with one another, tell us where you're from, kind of share your enthusiasm for drawing. There's also a Q&A function. And so for the final 30 minutes of the show, so will be a Q&A section where you can ask any of us questions. You can share your comments and observations, and we'll kind of go through that. So it'll be 3 of us drawing today. And so I want to introduce our first guest, Gigi Chen. So you may recognize her from our Painting Together show, plus all the videos that she's got with us on Artist Network and the blogs that she's written for us, some fantastic artwork that she's been posting on her Instagram account. So Gigi joins us from her studio in New York, and she is going to be drawing along with us. I should mention too, if you're going to want to follow along with us, you can find the reference images. I pinned them in the chat. They're also on the registration page there for that. So I have 3 reference images that you can be working from. I'm choosing the hawk here. We're going to see what Gigi and Brent are going to be working from. And I'm going to go through my materials in a little bit as well, but I want to bring our special guests on. So welcome, Gigi.
Hi. Oh, hi, everyone.
It's so great to see you. It's been a long time. Welcome again. So Gigi, again, has been our host with a Painting Together from the same studio. So if you're watching those shows, you probably recognize that. So tell us what you're working on today.
Oh, what am I working on today? Wow. I have to admit, guys, I haven't been drawing for a while. So I'm just going to be a little bit rusty. So this is going to be really exciting for everyone. So I chose the hawk, but I'm doing a more detailed version,
Awesome.
And I'm going to be using my favorite materials, ballpoint pens. So let's see how far we get in this, right?
Oh, that's awesome.
Super excited.
Yeah, so I'm excited to talk. We do get some questions about drawing in pen. I've only done 1 episode with pen, so that'll be awesome if you can kind of share your insights about how you use that, because that's a crazy medium.
Oh, yeah,
so awesome. All right. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Now we have Brent Eviston, one of my favorite artists. We've worked together on some of the videos that we have on Artist Network, a lot of figure drawing stuff. He's also very well known for his Art and Science of Drawing series, which is just massive. One of my favorite drawing instructors, and I really love his insights. So Brent is joining us from his studio in Oregon, I believe you're now, right?
Yes, Bend, Oregon.
Welcome. All right. So yeah, thank you again for joining us. Again, for the audience, I posted links to websites for both Gigi and Brent, so you can learn more about them. Definitely follow them on all the social media things. Check out Brent's instruction. They're amazing courses. So I feel very honored that you both are here today. Brent, so which one are you working on today?
I am working with the swan.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I love the big wings, the curving neck, so very gestural. So I'm very excited about that.
So the one that I was too intimidated to tackle. So yeah. And you're working with a different set of materials. What are you working with today?
Yeah, so I'm working with Lyra pencils, the Rembrandt polycolor pencils. So they're a colored pencil, and they just put out a really beautiful creamy line. They're oil-based colored pencils. So a lot of colored pencils are wax-based, but these are oil-based. So these have a really nice feel to them.
That's awesome. And you're working on that Canson Mi Tientes paper, right? Yes. We had some questions about that in the show yesterday. So
yeah, so if any of our attendees think we may be pronouncing it wrong, they can let us
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll figure out how to pronounce it at some point. All right. Well, we have a lot of people joining us, a lot of people shouting out. I don't know if you guys can see the chat or not, but I'll be monitoring that and see if there's any questions that come in. But again, I think we're going to be we're going to try to draw for a while. If any of you watching are going to follow along, that's awesome. But this is a little bit different than a normal drawing together show where we have a kind of a shorter time frame. And I'm going to really encourage you to use whatever materials you are excited by and kind of find your own approach, share your own approach, or if you'd like to just follow along with us. So, and if you are watching on YouTube, again, there's no chat on this one, but if you want to join in, there's still time. I think you can get over to Artist Network and sign up. So, all right. Now what I'm working with today, I've got, this is a cotton rag paper. It's the Legion Coventry rag. And I'm just working with the charcoal. So in the registration, I posted that. So I'm working with vine charcoal. I've got 3 different compressed charcoals. Now I've got this cool pencil extender. So one of the things I wanted to mention is the art materials giveaway, which ends tomorrow. So Jerry's Artorama supplied a whole set of drawing materials that we're giving away to people who register, or somewhat one lucky person who wins that. And one of the cool things in it is this cool pencil extender, this mechanical motorized eraser, willow charcoal. So that's what I'm using to lay out my drawing. I've got sketchbooks that they've provided. These are awesome, actually, these Soho urban sketchbooks. There's a set of those, bunch of cool extra things like charcoal, a whole set of graphite pencils. So that's what I'm working on. And I'd love to, if Gigi and Brent, feel free to, I don't know, kind of get started. And Gigi, if you want to I'd love to hear how, as you're drawing, what are you thinking about in these early stages with a ballpoint pen? Because I don't know how you manage a permanent medium like that. So.
Well, I'm watching you guys draw on pencils, and I'm like, oh, maybe I should sketch it out first, because I also don't really do such big ballpoint pen ones. What I kind of really focus on at the very beginning when I do the sketch is to think about proportions first. And it's not going to be perfect. I'm working kind of bigger, and I'm not generally used to working this big with a ballpoint pen. So I'm thinking about proportions first. I'm sort of going to draw in some shapes. And then I'm going to be working primarily with this brown, very cheap dollar store ballpoint pen, because they're really cheap, And then I'm probably going to go in with a couple of other colors. I have like a darker brown, and then I have a black and some yellow pens. So I'm just going to kind of work. Because for me, I think it would be really nice for this drawing to be primarily brown, just because it's a little bit prettier. Because like having a monochromatic drawing is really like kind of lovely. And I didn't want to just use black. So I'm going to go ahead and just start to sketch it out in like a brown ballpoint pen and a pencil first.
That sounds awesome. Yeah. And then Brent, how does it start for you?
Light lines, really basic shapes, and gesture. I think that's the key for me. And I'm a big believer that I am rarely, if ever, going to get it right the first time. So there is a lot of adjustment at the beginning stage. And Gigi, I wanted to say, I'm so happy you're using ballpoint pen. I am such a big fan. It's such an underrated material.
Yeah,
and,
it's totally
yeah, I love it. It's my my medium of choice if I ever go out sketching in the world. They're cheap. They're indestructible. They put out, a wider range of line. Oh, wow. Look at that.
I got this from the dollar store. So many colors.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, those of you who have been following me for a while kind of know generally my process, which is to lay it out as a gesture, like Brent said. So for me, all drawing is gesture drawing. And so you're starting with a gesture and you're gradually refining as you go. When I hear Brent and Gigi talk about working with such permanent media, it's inspiring, because I don't know as if I have that confidence, because so much of my process is built on moving the material around. And so laying in the gesture, correcting the proportions, and then building the refinement. We've been talking about that a lot in the show lately, is distinguishing between adding detail and refining the form. And so I'm excited to see as their drawings come together, how all of that gets managed.
Well, I think that one thing about using permanent media is I think it's possible to use permanent media in an impermanent way. And I know with ballpoint pen and these pencils don't erase very well, but when you start off incredibly lightly at the beginning, then you don't tend to need to erase the lines at the end so much because they're barely visible. And I think that that's certainly how I try and use more permanent media. And I think there's a trick of the eye that occurs at the end of the drawing when people tend to notice the finished lines, the dark lines, the dramatic lines, and they often will visually edit out those earlier light process lines, even though they're there on the page to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love that. And something that we've talked about on the show too is showing evolution of the drawing on the page. Because drawing, we talk about is it's an expression of our thoughts about the subject. So there's an evolution that happens as we come to understand the subject better, and then the drawing simply mirrors that whole process. And so I like the idea of, if you're approaching that permanent medium in a way that kind of really kind of captures that, you can see, if you look closely, those light lines there. So, yeah.
Well, I also think it's really important to just embrace that that's just what the ballpoint pen is, or any other permanent media, like it's not like, it's just what it is. It's like, you messed it up, you could also turn the page. It's no big deal, especially because these pens are so cheap. They're like $1 for a whole pack, at the dollar store. And I don't think about it. And sketchbook, just kind of keep turning the page, And if you are making something really big and you want to do more permanent, then you plan more, right? So you just plan. But if for something like this, it's like, since it's mostly gesture, it's like just kind of fun to embrace the fact that you're kind of gonna mess up, and it's not that big of a deal, and it's not even that much of a mess up.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. I really love that mentality about just art in general. It's like, it's part of the process, messing up. So for those of you watching, I see some questions in the chat. I just pinned another bit.ly link for the reference images. If you are following along, I'm hoping that shows up to everybody. And then, greetings from Maine. The electric eraser is this Accurate brand. So that, again, that's in that kit of materials from Jerry's Artorama. So if you go to artistnetwork.com/artparty, you'll see on that page a place to register to win that, and it lists out all the materials that are included in the kit, and that tells you what this eraser is. And I forgot to mention the other materials I'm working with here. I've got this Jerry's Vanish eraser, which I kind of recently discovered, and I think it works really well. It's a good rubber eraser, and plus my trusty blending stump that I've been using, as well as some a kneaded eraser here. So those are, again, for those of you who have been following this show, those are kind of the standards now for working with charcoal for me. And I do need to branch out from that. I did that one drawing with a pen, with a felt tip pen, I believe, and that I haven't done that again because it was really hard. It was really challenging to adapt the thinking. And so, what I'm doing right now at this stage is just with the compressed charcoal. Now that there's a layer of vine charcoal that helps kind of accept the compressed charcoal on top of the paper, it floats a little bit more easily. It's a little less aggressive on the page. So if you are working with charcoal, if you go directly to the white paper with the compressed charcoal, it can sometimes feel really harsh. And so if you start with the layer of vine charcoal, that it helps to kind of ease the charcoal onto the surface there a little bit. I see some other people giving shout outs about ballpoint pen. Oh, Brent, you got a follower here. Brent, I'm awaiting your published 8-week course book. So that's another exciting thing. Brent's got a book that just came out or is coming out. I know it just came out from the ebook version, right?
Yes, and serendipitously, I just happen to have a copy here,
What?
print version. Yeah, it's
awesome.
not out it's not out in the print version yet. That should be coming in September. But the ebook is available now, and it's available for pre-order as well. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to write. Writing is incredibly difficult. I've realized. So.
Yeah, yeah. Now, as you're putting together the book, how did it affect your approach to teaching drawing? Did it change it at all, or did it reveal anything for you, or?
Yeah, well, I've taught face-to-face for many years, and I've taught online now for 4 or 5 years now. And writing is a newer medium of teaching, and they're all so different. And I think that every time I learn how to teach in a new format like writing, it certainly improves the my online classes and my face-to-face classes.
Yeah.
But with writing, of course, I'm not there to explain something better if the student has a question. So I think so much of writing becomes about saying something as clearly as possible the first time and trying to anticipate the questions that might be asked and make sure that those answers get into the book.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of have to put yourself in the learner's shoes, which has got to be challenging, since you developed a curriculum and you know it so intimately from that perspective, to almost kind of shed that knowledge and see, well, how would somebody understand this, coming to it fresh.
Yes, at the same time, I still feel like I'm very much learning about drawing. I'm still learning things constantly, and so I still see myself as a learner with a huge amount of ground to cover in terms of knowledge and skill. So because I try and always keep myself in that place as a novice, I think that helps me stay in the mindset of as well. And I wanted to go back to something that Gigi was talking about, which I think is so important, is that I'm assuming most of the attendees here are students and are here interested in learning. And it's really important to know that I think we can all admit as professionals that many, if not most, of the drawings or paintings we do don't work out the way that we think they're going to. And at least in my experience, good work is the byproduct of a lot of work. And so many pieces don't work out, and that's completely fine. That's just part of the process. And I think all too often, students and beginners are more concerned with doing good finished work than I think professionals are often. As we know, it'll come eventually. We just keep going to the studio, we keep showing up, we keep working, and the good work will eventually come. But it's certainly not every piece.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I totally agree. I'm kind of curious from both of you then, what is it that you're looking for? Is there something that bubbles to the surface that you might kind of come up against frequently in your work that you have to, I don't know, that is an indicator of good versus bad, right? It's like, when we say it can be nebulous what good and bad is, but then, I know for me, there are certain things that I just kind of have to, it's like hurdles that I'm having to keep going over and over again to get me to that good art stage. And I'm curious if there's something that stands out for you, both of you.
Yeah. I mean, so, I'm predominantly an acrylic painter, and the beauty of acrylic, and also, I mean, something about, what you were guys talking about with learning and how students can feel like, oh, you're never, everything has to be perfect, is that I know now that I'm very familiar with the different stages of how acrylic painting works, and even drawings, obviously, is that I know that you never quite get a good painting on the first try. And to know that, oh, it's really ugly right now. Oh, it's really ugly today. It's really also really ugly today. Well, Maybe it's ugly for a week, but knowing that by the act of continuously working on it, that you'll eventually get there, especially with painting. You know, to know that. So I think that just takes practice and experience to know that, you know, just like you can like tear a page out of a sketchbook when the drawing is not good, that you can just you can't continuously layer paint onto an acrylic painting or an oil painting, and it'll get there, you know, at some point. Because as long as you kind of have a goal and you have a pretty good idea of what that end goal is supposed to look like, you'll figure out how to get there. You know, and that's just having a lot of, and maybe experience also breeds a little bit of faith in yourself, you know? So maybe in both ways, you just have to kind of have to practice your own faith, you know, your own faith in yourself.
Yeah. Is that, go ahead, Brent.
I was just going to say, I think that Gigi is absolutely right. I think often students have an expectation that a drawing should look good at each phase. And I think one of the things that comes with a lot of practice and experience is being able to know that it's not working, but know that it's where it needs to be for whatever step that you're at or wherever phase of the piece you're at. And I've seen a lot of students abandon work way too soon and thinking that it's, you know, it's not working out now, therefore it won't work out later on in the process. And I find that's rarely the case. I mean, usually, unless you spill paint all over something, that it's rarely unsalvageable. And even spilled paint on it can be a happy accident as well. So
yeah.
And having a little bit of faith of knowing that maybe you use the material differently from what you think you're supposed to be doing also takes time. You know, like, how do you know if realistic painting is really even for you? Or how do you know if abstract painting is even for you? It's really great to have the chance to try everything before you know maybe this is actually the way I should be drawing or painting, you know?
Yeah. That's something that we've talked a bit about in the show before, is kind of connecting with the materials that connect with you, right? And there's certain materials that just align with how we process information, how we see the world, how we express ourselves. So colored pencil might work for one person and really kind of align with, just again, the pace of our thoughts and how we think through problems or really study subjects, versus like charcoal. Like today, I'm working a lot larger than I normally work in the show, and that's changing how I move and how I approach the medium, and then how I think about the subject. Like I can be a lot more expressive. I can draw from the arm and the shoulder a lot more than I can in the show when I'm working down on the table. And so that's something I guess I'd encourage for anybody who's watching right now to use these opportunities. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to bring Brent and Gigi on in particular to join me here is because it's such a strong contrast to the habits we've built in the show. And it's really healthy to break those things and to find other ways of thinking about art, thinking about drawing and about the medium, and not get locked into one instructor too much at the risk of losing followers of the show. I'm going to say also explore other people. So take Brent's courses, get the book, follow Gigi, check out her work, and check out the Painting Together show. And it all just builds your foundation, I think, in a healthy way. And that's one of the things we emphasize in the show, is that so much of what we do as artists is give ourselves intentional challenges to grow in particular ways. And so it's so easy to fall into a habit that may ultimately lead to kind of limited growth. So if you shake things up and say, I'm gonna tackle a medium or a process that is entirely new to me. It's great seeing some familiar names here, people from all over watching. A lot of people sending a congratulations. People commenting on following the show, Gigi's show. That's awesome. All right, so right at this stage right now, I'm at kind of in the refining. So I had laid out the gesture using the vine charcoal, building layers of compressed charcoal, and I used the blending stump to start to start to kind of smooth things out, average out the values, and start to reinforce the form. So paying attention to the direction of the mark so they reinforce the form of the subject a little bit. And I'm going to, throughout this whole process, it's about correcting those proportions. And so for me, I feel like an understanding of the proportions happens a little bit later than in some. Oh my God, I'm looking at Brent and Gigi's drawings, and they've, you've done so much so quickly, and all while talking. That's wild. But for me, I guess the proportions I struggle with getting quickly, and I recognize that I'm kind of constantly tweaking them. I'm kind of curious for Gigi and Brent, like what does your process look like in terms of solving the problem of getting correct proportions? Anything that bubbles up to the surface?
Oh, I just like draw really quickly and hope it works.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I came on camera and I saw you guys are drawing really big. I had a little small drawing pad, and I was like, oh, well, I gotta match this. I had to go look at my
Oh my gosh. So you pivoted to a large scale right at the last
yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's different. I've decided it's just going to be looser, and I'm just going to play with the hatching a lot more, and just let it look more gestural than anything else, and if I want to, I can pick and choose different parts to make more detail. Like I think I'm going to make obviously more detail in the face and leave a lot more of this body open. Even though I kind of, because I love drawing birds, really want to draw every single feather, but let's not go crazy just yet. Like the details are the cherry on top, right? That the details are the dessert.
Yeah.
So right now we're just sort of like forming the main course, before we kind of go like pick out little things like put the shine in the eye, which I think that sometimes, especially when you're starting out, you want to like, oh, I want to put the sparkle in the eye right now, and then you end up drawing over it, and then what, So you have to sort of, because you want to do the pretty thing first, because the pretty thing is always the eye, right?
Yeah.
Do the pretty thing, but it's like, but then you end up, because once you make something really, really detailed, you start feeling compelled to make the rest of it detailed. And the thing is, what I like to think is, what if I did the whole thing loose and then just picked out parts, rather than making everything really detailed right away, and then you have to match the whole thing, which just really kind of complicates and belabors the whole process,
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Brent, what's your kind of association with detail then?
I completely agree with Gigi that drawing quickly at the beginning really helps, and one of the things that does is it forces you to stay away from detail. And I think it's so much easier to work with big forms and big shapes and get those at the right size and at the right location first before dealing with detail. And so I would say that I spend a huge amount of time in a drawing just moving around those big shapes, trying to get those in the correct proportion in relationship to one another. And I don't want to give the impression that details are easy, but once you have the big shapes handled, it takes a lot of the pressure off of the details. You've got those big shapes and proportions handled. You have to worry less about if details are in the right place. And one of the things so perilous about starting with detail too soon is that if you've rendered a wing and spent 2 hours on all of these feathers, and then you realize the wing is too big, there's nowhere to go there. You've got to erase or start over. And I think that's a situation that I always try and avoid at all costs. So I tend to work very big and very generally first, and very slowly work my way down to smaller details.
Yeah.
And,
No, I love that way of describing that. Oh, go on.
What I was going to say as well, you two are both bringing up so many interesting things to talk about. But I think the other thing I would want to say about detail is that there's a misconception that a good drawing captures all of the detail. And what Gigi was saying about picking just some of the details, I think that's so powerful. And I don't think that a drawing is a mere copy of reality. I think that drawing should be the product of decision making. We want to decide what to show a viewer. And in fact, when I think of a drawing, when I think of what a finished drawing is, I think of it as when I've shown the viewer what I think are the most interesting or beautiful or dynamic parts of the subject. And once I have addressed those elements, I feel the drawing can be finished, even though I have aspects that are left unaddressed. And I think that's a really powerful way to draw. And I know this is very subjective. I know many people love more finished work, and I think that's great too. And that also goes back, Scott, to what you were saying about working with many teachers, is that you pick up different things. We all have similarities with how we work, and we all have different approaches. And ultimately, students shouldn't want to draw like me or Gigi or Scott. They should want to figure out how they want to draw. And it'll include elements from all of the instructors that they've worked with, and hopefully it'll include elements they've arrived at on their own.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that, that's perfect. And that's something that we've been talking about a lot about in the show is, what's kind of worked through the show in general has been this mentality of starting with a gesture and then gradually refining and putting yourself in control of how far to take that refinement. So if you want to keep it loose and gestural, you can. If you want to build it into be a fully rendered and highly detailed form, you can. But making it a kind of a conscious choice rather than an expected default to, just simply to add detail in thinking that that's the only way to do it. And then, like I was saying earlier, I think one of the breakthroughs for me is really thinking about the difference between refinement and detail. Because when I put myself in the mindset of detail, I tighten up, my marks change, my brain kind of ignores the whole of the subject, and I lose the forest for the trees, right? And so but I think about refinement, and it's a matter of seeing the whole and then gradually selecting where I give more attention, then it feels more freeing, if that makes sense. Like I get so claustrophobic when I think about details, and then it messes up everything. And then when I do, like you said, I mean, I see people who do work highly detailed, and it blows my mind. It's amazing work. But I've had to kind of work my way around that.
So I have an interesting question for both of you. So if for students attending this, you will notice that we've all used the word gesture.
Yep.
And I prioritize gesture over everything else. To me, gesture is more important than accuracy. It's more important than realism. But I remember when I was a student, when my instructors would talk about gesture, it took me years to figure out what they were talking about. It's a very opaque word.
It is.
If you're not involved heavily in this process. So I would love to put you both on the spot and give me what you think gesture is.
I can see how explaining the process of gesture is difficult when you're a teacher, because I think students mostly go in wanting to do the thing that's on the page, right? Like wanting to copy the cartoon character, wanting to copy the photograph, right? And so they're resistant to the idea of loosening up. And I remember completely being confused by it. And what really helped was when I was given a really messy material, like a piece of charcoal. And then you had to be messy, and you couldn't possibly render out like a Da Vinci drawing. You have to. Yeah. So I think the idea of like gesture is following the form, looking at your subject and sort of just going for it, which is also, maybe it's a little bit more metaphorical, or a little bit too like cutesy poo to say, right? But it's really hard to teach. The thing is, when and maybe because you guys have instructed a lot more than I have, it's really kind of hard to teach kids to loosen up, or teach really students to loosen up and stop just looking at what's in front of them.
Yeah.
And I think even for myself, like I've really had to struggle, and it wasn't until I left school that I started to embrace loosening up, because I was just more confident in my own eye, you know? And maybe
Yeah.
the idea of being comfortable, then maybe you guys can be looser and do more gestural work. And maybe it does take time. Because I think if you teach looseness too much as a foundation, then I also think you're also losing the foundation of drawing itself, you know? Like, and then that can also be a problem. And then people are like missing that part of the technicalities of drawing. So I think it's about really striking a balance of saying, I really want to learn this thing, but I also want to learn this other thing. And then with time, you learn how to marry the two, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a challenge even for myself, you know?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's something that I don't think I really had considered, just the comfortability with the materials being an aspect of the gesture. In that, so the focus that we place on gesture in the Drawing Together show is kind of what I was saying earlier, that the drawing is a reflection of the process that we go through to better understand the subject. And we're using the drawing process to understand the subject, and the better we understand the subject, the stronger the drawing is going to be. So they work back and forth with one another. And so with the gesture, all that is that initial recognition that we don't understand the form. This is what you're talking about earlier, Brent. You made that comment that you kind of expect that this is not going to be right. And so in most of our world, we come to an understanding of the things around us instantaneously. And so what drawing does is it allows us to kind of slow down and really analyze, how did we get there? And so what the gesture is just that reflection of what's that initial impulse, right? And we take the pressure off of ourselves to have a fully formed understanding of the form, recognizing that we're just getting information on the page that we're then going to move around. And as we gather information about the subject, then the image emerges along with it. But so it really comes down for me to be a mindset. But then what you're talking about, Gigi, it adds that other layer that I don't think I really appreciated, is that part of allowing yourself to just accept that looseness and just to kind of go with it comes with being comfortable with the materials. Because like when you pick up an object and you're like, I don't know what to do with this and how it works.
And also trusting your own instincts, which I really have to say that instincts are also something that has to be honed. Like you're not just going to suddenly know what to do. You know, like, I mean, then that's a really great question, because you guys have taught drawing. I've actually never really taught drawing. In fact, guys, my limited art education is mostly with Artist Network. I really haven't taught a whole lot beyond the videos that I've done with you guys. And it was a bit of a crash course, right? And I learned a lot from teaching, but like, how did you guys like, given that every week, Scott, you've done 100 drawings, which is crazy, right? It's 100 classes. And you've done that continuously pretty much every week. And like, but what you teach is still to sort of like not copy, but like sort of, you know, still follow along, right? Like how do you go about teaching any of your students how to just chill out? You know, and also Brent, same question. How do you teach your kids or your teachers, not your kids, but your students, how to just chill out and just like be okay with like not being good at anything right away, like at all, you know? Yeah. And how do you teach them how to be comfortable?
So one thing I realized being a drawing teacher is that the skills and techniques are about half of it. The other half is really about managing the mind and emotions. Yeah. And it sounds like a strange thing to say, but maybe this is a little off topic, but I hope this is helpful for some students. So I talk to my students a lot. I'm really interested in what's going through their mind. And one thing I noticed in beginning drawing classes is that so many students would talk about how much they berated themselves in the privacy of their own minds while they were working. They would talk about some of the incredibly cruel things they would say that if you said to another person in the class, everybody would agree, like, that's terrible. You're being so cruel to that, your fellow students. But students talk to themselves in their own heads this way all the time. And I think just bringing that to the surface and saying, you know what, so many people do this. And my guess is that many people who are attending right now, they recognize part of this. They recognize like, yeah, I do ask myself these terrible questions like, how could I have made this stupid mistake? Or how could I ever thought I would be good at this? And those kinds of comments in the mind are so common. So I think it's just treating yourself with the same kind of care and respect that you would treat a fellow student who's learning to draw. If you wouldn't say, something to a fellow student while they're in a class, try not to say that to yourself. And I think that's a critical part of it. And, this realization too, that drawing is really hard to learn. It takes a lot of time. And I think it's been helpful for some students to realize that, not all of our drawings or paintings work out. In fact, many of them don't. And that's all part of the process. And that doesn't go away. I think the more you work, the more likely you are to have good finished work. But I every drawing I start, I'm concerned that this is the one that's not going to work out. And I think that just hearing that, knowing that's a natural part of the process can be freeing. And when the drawing or painting doesn't work out, it's fine. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. I remember those existential crisis moments when I was younger, when it's just like, when you go to art school, right, and you're making a decision, I'm going to be an artist, and that's your identity, then there's that part of that in the process where you have to confront the concept that if I make bad art, that I'm a bad person. And it's like, and I'm like, and it just elevates all of that. It's like everything, there's so much pressure, It's like, if I didn't have that identity of being an artist, then I mean, like, that drawing didn't turn out right, but that's all right, because I'm not an artist, I'm someone else. But I realized that part of that kind of getting comfortable, not berating myself, was to kind of loosen that attachment to the identity of being an artist and saying it's okay, like, and also, hearing from artists like you both, reading interviews and listening to interviews with other artists, and realizing that there's the same struggles. And when we go to a gallery, we're seeing the tip of the iceberg of all the failed paintings that an artist has created, right? And that they're managing all the same insecurities that I am. And then, to be honest, actually, I feel like this show itself, going live and having the pressure to make a drawing live in front of people, however many people attend, it kind of forces you to take a lane and say, I can't be too attached to this, because it'll break me if I do. So, but we're seeing other people on the chat here that are aligning with that. So thank you all for sharing that. If you're sharing your own associations with self-criticism. Thomas is also adding to the gesture comments about identifying basic shapes as being part of the gesture, which I think is definitely an element. And then Vicky is asking Brent what the brand of colored pencil you're using. I believe those were the Lyra, right?
Yeah, Lyra Rembrandt polycolor pencils.
That's a long name.
Yes.
So.
But Lyra doesn't make that many pencils, so if you just search for Lyra, these are most likely the ones that are going to come up.
Got it. And then Gigi's working from the dollar store ballpoint pens. Is that what you?
Oh yeah, guys.
That's awesome.
Go to the dollar store.
It's like, that's what you did with like some of the brushes and painting together. That was really cool.
Oh,
it's like, just grab a dollar store paintbrush and go for it. So where are you guys at right now with your drawings here? What's top of mind for you as you're in this stage?
I'm trying not to want to draw every feather, but I'm trying to. It's tough. I want to continue to keep it pretty gestural, but I kind of feel I'm already worried about overdoing one thing or another, which is like a funny thing, given that I'm still in this like beginning stage, But yeah, it's funny. It's funny talking about. It's funny having like almost like a psychological conversation about insecurity.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, hey guys, we're on camera.
Yeah, sorry to bring everybody down at this art party. Make everybody feel bad about themselves. Yeah, and so yeah, for those of you who are watching, it's up on YouTube right now, so that'll be recorded, so you can always watch that as well. So, but yeah, that's one of the things that it is genuinely one of my biggest hopes out of the drawing instruction that I give, is just to help kind of shed that. You just kind of build into your art education the expectation that it's this lifelong pursuit. Like you said early, Gigi, that, it's just a piece of paper, it's just a drawing. You can do a lot, you can just keep going with it, and have fun with it, because then it all plays out in the drawing as well. I really believe that marks are thoughts, right? They start as a mental energy, really. It's something that happens in our brain that travels down our arm into our pencil, onto the page, and it's capturing something that's unique to us, ourselves. And so part of it is kind of just, like you said, Brent, being kind to yourself throughout this whole process, and trusting that you'll get there, wherever there is.
Yeah.
But for those of you who beat themselves up, I totally get it. I think we've all been there. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to always kind of say, like, it's like, you're in it, if you want to make art, you're in it for the long game, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, oh man, it's a lot. There's a whole lot going on. There's going to be a million more drawings after this one, guys. It's kind of like a funny thing to think about when you kind of, I'm sure all of you guys, I mean, even you, like Scott, specifically, you've done 100 drawings for this, right? Like, it's kind of like bonkers. And in the span of like 100 weeks. So, I mean, did you ever think that you'd like have this many classes where you've had so many subjects and like so many students, and have this like so continuously just go on and on and on,
Yeah, no, that's not at all. And I think that's part of it too, is like, I also like to, and Brent and I, we and I talked about this recently too. The title of instructor feels uncomfortable for me. So that's why I constructed the show as Drawing Together. It's just like, all right, I'm here and I'll talk through what I'm doing, but feel free to do anything else differently, right? That's why I'm really excited to have both of you on here, to share this, kind of get out of the bubble that is created. But it's been a blast. And what's been really helpful is when one of the things we talk about quite a bit actually is the power of effective feedback, and those viewers that you all have been with us for over a year now, have helped me through so many drawings, pointing out areas to say, hey, check this, check the angle of the shoulders, or the distance between the eyes, or the placement of this object, things like that we kind of can overlook when we get really sucked into the drawing. And so we talk about that, the power of feedback, in that when you find somebody that can give you the feedback that you really need and is helpful, that can be gold. But sometimes, like, we'll reach out to people who they haven't spent time thinking about drawing and what would improve somebody's drawing. They're just having an initial reaction to it, and that may not be helpful. So I'm kind of curious if you guys have people that you lean on to help you over, kind of get out of your bubble, or kind of rethink your drawing in a different way, or your painting, or just kind of give you that feedback that you need.
Yeah, I very much think of drawing as a form of communication. And I think it's really easy to know where the drawing is going as the one who's creating it. And it can be challenging to get a sense of what's missing to a viewer. So I think certainly my wife is the most important viewer, and she's the most important person that gives feedback to my work. And she sees it a lot. And oftentimes I'll just bring a piece home from the studio and put it up somewhere. And she'll make comments, because it's really hard as the creator to see what's going well, what's going poorly. The other thing that I really recommend is just getting distance from the work. I think there's a common misconception that an artist will sit down and work on a piece until it's finished. And I will often put a drawing away for days or weeks and pull it out and put it back up in the studio. And when you can get fresh eyes on it, I find that incredibly useful. Things that didn't occur to me during the initial creation of it tend to be much more apparent.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's really helpful sometimes to start a lot of things at once and then try to finish them. That's helpful for me. When I work on a series of paintings, I work on a lot of them at the same time. I put one away and then do another one, put one away. And then by the time you're kind of up to the 5th painting and you go backwards, you're like, oh, you just got better. You know?
Yeah.
You're just
That's
better.
interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, in terms of having people to look at the work, I share my studio with 3 amazing older artists who all have various levels of like art education and various points in their career. And sometimes they walk in and they're like, okay, so you should put that away now because it's looking crazy or it's looking like overworked or like you're just finished.
Yeah.
You need to move on with your life, which is it's like a thing, you know, it's a very interesting. You need to have people that you trust. And you're right, like that, having that kind of useful feedback rather than just showing it to somebody who just kind of likes art or who doesn't really know art, like it really doesn't help. Or sometimes when I was younger, I had people come in and be like, oh, I don't like your subject matter. So it's like, well, but do you like the drawing? You know, that's not, it's like, that's not really helpful. I mean, I work with so many different types of artists and I work with different types of curators. I've had curators tell me that they didn't like my work at all and that I should just stop making it or do something
my
different.
gosh.
And completely not helpful, right? Because you yourself, you should generally do the things that you really love. If you want to do 1,000 bird drawings, you should. It doesn't matter if somebody's like, why are you doing all these bird drawings? Which is generally what I get, you know. But it's not, sometimes also like maybe it just doesn't matter. Maybe you just want to work in your own bubble and that's okay too. You know, like I don't know, criticism or sometimes things are not helpful and you should just learn. Most people can just kind of learn whether or not, I don't know, criticism from other people come from different places, right? And you should just it takes time to hone where that criticism is coming from and what the context is. Oh man, yeah. I mean, I've been torn down by many people, and I've been lifted up by many others. And at some point, it kind of doesn't matter because I love what I do, you know. Yeah. And that, I mean, I could go on about that, but that's just like a long story about my life. But you know, but mostly it's more than anything, because like a lot of this has been about like instinct. I just want your instinct to believe in yourself, you know.
Well, it's interesting because there's some questions that are kind of coming into the chat, and I'm going to throw out there. So if so I'm gonna set my drawing aside. I think I've taken this about as far as I can. So I'll manage the chat here in the questions. If you guys can feel free to keep working or as you go here. So there's one question in the chat. How much of your drawing is a result of training compared to your own vision? Which that's kind of an interesting question, and I think it feels a little open to a kind of interpretation. See what kind of bubbles up for you guys.
Will you ask that again? What was that?
Well, actually, then So this is Eula kind of clarified, rewriting the question: how much the end result of your drawings are affected by the techniques learned in art school? So like. I think there's a kind of a question in there, like what role does kind of technical knowledge play in this process for you as you're evaluating your work?
Do you want to
take
a crack at that, Gigi, or shall I start?
I think you should start because that's a big question.
It is.
Yeah.
That is with the caveat of whether or not you learn particular things.
Yeah.
Like formally, right?
Yeah. And actually, I think my understanding is that these kinds of the more technical aspects of drawing are being taught in art school less and less.
Yeah.
But I think there are certain critical techniques that everyone who's interested in representational art should learn. And I think the three of us, we are all interested in representational art. And so things like how light and shadow work on an object, that's really science. That's not really an art form so much. It's predictable. Light follows very specific rules. Things like how an object diminishes in perspective in space. Again, that's much more scientific than it is artistic. So there are these technical systems that play into it. And when you bring in figure drawing or animal drawing as well, that gets amplified when you're dealing with anatomy. So I think that I am fascinated by the technical aspects of drawing, and I think they're excellent to learn. But I think that going back to what I was talking about before with gesture, I always prioritize gesture over accuracy. If I can exaggerate a line that I think is going to look more interesting or more dynamic, I'll do it. And even though it's not technically accurate, and I think it's the phrase I use with a lot of my students is, at the end of the day, you want a drawing or painting that is believable. And I think believable is a much more interesting word than accurate or realistic, because believable allows you to exaggerate, it allows you to emphasize certain aspects of a drawing or painting and leave other things out. But to take much more control about what we want to communicate with the drawing, to show the viewer the parts that we think are most interesting.
Yeah.
So one example of that, and this is something I really like to use in drawings a lot, is I'm not sure how well students can see some of the more subtle details, but when you have a photograph of something, all of the aspects of the subject are in focus. Every one part is as detailed as every other part. But in the drawing, to push the space in the drawing, I put a lot more detail into the wing in front, and I'm probably going to leave the wing in back just barely there, and that creates a sense of depth on the flat page. Now, is it realistic? No, I've deviated from the reality of the piece, but I think it makes it more, in one sense, because it creates a greater sense of depth on the page. A drawing can emphasize and exaggerate those aspects. You get it creates more space than maybe is in the photograph. So it comes down to learning the technical aspects of drawing and painting, and then using them to communicate what you as an artist want to communicate, but not feel trapped by them. As Gigi said, this is a huge question. And I don't know if I've done. I've illuminated anything useful, but
and then Tom he posted that he said, I heard that the science and technical aspect make it possible to know how to express myself, my scientific creativity, or my specific creativity. I'm sorry. That is what Tom is writing there, similar to what I think what you're saying. For me, technical mastery just opens doors for the expression, but it's never the purpose for creating it. And if I relate that to music, when I was trying to learn how to play the guitar, I had songs in my head that I want to put out there, but I couldn't because I had no idea how to play this instrument. Right. And so you have to get to this point where that helped open doors, and then you kind of bump up against your technical mastery when you feel compelled to express yourself in a new way, and your technique doesn't get you there. But I think if you translate it to music, it's never necessarily about the technical mastery. You can be wowed by it, but it creates something that's deeper that you're responding to. And for some people, it can be a lack of technical mastery that you respond to, that is compelling, that pulls you in and maybe creates an emotional response that precisely because there's a rejection of technical mastery. And so, there's so many different ways of looking at it. There is, so Brenda, welcome. You've been with us for a while. And she has I'm curious to hear what you both say about this. Do you have any recommendations to artists who haven't had any formal training? Is there anything that kind of comes top of mind for you guys for, I don't know what that means? Is there a way is there something that you recommend to people who are just getting started, necessarily haven't had any formal training? Or is there perhaps a different way of looking at that thought?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing I would think is don't spend a lot of money and just use what you have at hand. You know, I think that it's false to think that the more money you spend on a material, the better the work will be. You know,
Mhm.
I think that the initial investment is time and not the actual fancy materials. So, you know, I think getting like a cheap sketchbook, getting a bunch of pencils or pens, you know, like whatever,
Mhm.
and just starting is the best thing I would suggest. And just to play as much as you can, play and play and play. And then, I mean, just like you guys were talking about education, it's like, I think that the desire for education comes from knowing that you like playing. You know, like when I was a kid, I loved copying cartoon characters. I loved watching animated films, and I loved copying pictures of the Little Mermaid and Aladdin. And I grabbed like my markers and my pencils, and I filled up my sketchbook as a kid. And then from there, I started getting art books. I started looking at Da Vinci and Michelangelo. I went to the library and just picked out all these books and started copying them. And then from there, I wanted to go to art school. You know, I think it comes from first the desire, the time, and then technical stuff. I mean, if you so choose to want to learn technical stuff, you know, and because the resources now are so fairly inexpensive, like going online or picking up a book from the library is pretty inexpensive. Everything else is just really time and investment.
Mhm.
And I mean, and you guys were talking about, and you know, that question about technical being like whether being technical is important. I think it's important to know the rules, at least,
Mhm.
or at least respect the rules. You know, and I think a lot of, and what Brent was saying, how sometimes they're not even teaching actual drawing in art school now. I don't even know how, I mean, the thing is, if you're going to do art school, pick your instructors carefully. You know, like if you're going to even look at YouTube instructors, look at it all carefully and see what really works for you and what resonates for you, rather than thinking, oh, I'm going to just, I don't know. I mean, meaning that
Mhm.
for you to recognize your own limitations and also having and spending the time to go beyond the limitations is also important. But but you can't really break the rules unless you know the rules, or at least respect the rules, you know? And I think
Yeah.
what we all do is really a sum of our whole lives, not just our art education. It's the sum of the books that we read, the things that we look at, the people that we know, the kinds of people that we know. And
Mhm.
also just for me, because I went to art school for high school and for college, all I wanted to do when I left art school was not being around artists for a while, you know, and especially being in the art world, you're just surrounded by painters and you're surrounded by all these different people who have like a goal. But I felt that having just like an endless source of curiosity is really important. Like go read books, go see other things. Don't just paint. Don't just be friends with artists. Don't just be friends with the kind of people that you're normally around, because it's easy, you know? And then from there you can kind of get a lot of ideas. I mean, for me, the technical stuff, I have it and it gets better. But for me, the most important thing is still learning how to tell stories, you know? And I feel like the more I read, the more I look at things, the more stories that I want to tell. And then I want to get better at telling them through my technical abilities.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that Gigi said. I think learning the technical rules is very important. And I think being honest with yourself when you're a student, being able to tell what it is that you want to be able to communicate with your drawings and paintings. And if you're struggling with that, that doesn't mean that it's creative expression, right? That's not just your style. It's possible that you're just making a technical error. And in some sense, the technical aspects are easier because they're very system driven. There are right and wrong answers in that part of it. And they're learnable, they're teachable, they're not very subjective. And the creative side is often a little more challenging because that's where you're off on your own, kind of creating your own path. And so
Mhm.
I know that the technical aspects can seem challenging and daunting, but again, they're familiar. They're well known by many people. Many millions of people have taught and learned them, and there's some comfort in that. But I think being realistic of how much time and practice they actually take as well. And I
Yeah.
often have students who want to start their drawing process or painting process with figure drawing. And what I always tell them is, there is no beginning figure drawing. Figure drawing is just advanced drawing.
Yeah.
And so you really can't, well, they say, well, can I learn the fundamentals in a week or a month? Like, no. And I think just being realistic about that when you're learning, and that it takes time, it takes practice, but again, it is very achievable with time and practice.
Yeah. I think that's definitely something I can connect with as well. And part of it is just, with these questions, it's about, so much can change when you don't have a healthy mindset towards something. So it's just like, if you're approaching it in a particular way, it can be really helpful. And so, for example, as we're talking about technical mastery, it's helpful to recognize that it takes time, and it's not matter. I mean, some people, we all evolve at different rates, but that time is really necessary for that. Like, and if you put the pressure on yourself to get there faster, and you again tie that to your identity, then it stops you from drawing. And so for me, I think it's adopting whatever mindset keeps you drawing. Right? And then, like you said, then you layer on the curiosity that pushes you forward. We mentioned in the show yesterday, I think it was yesterday, that the last thing I want is a drawing that I'm 100% happy with, because it's that little bit. It's like going to a casino saying I could win next time. That gets me excited for the next one. And I'm like, oh, I'm happy with this. You got to identify what you're happy with, and you bring that into the next one. But then you identify, well, where can I push this farther? Not necessarily where is this bad or where is this good. It's like, where can I advance next? And I think your art will reveal that. So these are all some great questions. Let me see. Thank you for posting that. Don't forget to enter to win the materials given from Jerry's that ends tomorrow. So there's the link in the chat there. Anonymous attendee, I'm a copycat artist. Any picture I see that I love, I try to paint or draw. I always challenge the picture or change the picture a bit. Is it okay to be a copycat as I teach myself to draw and paint? That's a really good question. I mean, for me, I think copying is such an essential part. And you mentioned this, Gigi, that's how you got started, is copying. And it kind of folds into a mentality that I often talk with early students about is where does style come in? And there's this feeling you got to get to there first. You got to identify the style. You got to identify what's unique to you first, or right out of the gate. But for me, I would say, copy. For me though, it's helpful to know what you're copying will give to you, right? How is it going to advance your work? There is tremendous value in doing a master copy, for example. And if you want to understand how Michelangelo or Degas processed information and controlled the materials, is really helpful to copy them. But it's also helpful to copy images. The images that we're using today are photographs that we're copying, and it gives you an opportunity to compare your work to the reference, right? When it's purely abstract, you're really only comparing it to a thought or a feeling, which can be very nebulous, something difficult to hold on to. And so if you copying, like I said, I think can be very helpful, but it's a great way to advance your skill when you take control over that and choose selectively what you're copying to develop particular skills, because it's really easy to get locked into a particular mode once you find success in that. And so keep pushing yourself out of those comfort zones as you're copying. I'm curious I don't know if Gigi or Brent have anything to, challenge or add, or tell me I'm wrong. That's awesome. You're like, never copy.
No, I love copying. Copying was like my whole thing when I was a kid. I knew that I was good because I was able to copy a drawing, I knew, because like, it basically is like a signpost. It's like, it's a goalpost, right? It's like, well, if you can make it look like this, then you can make other things look like other things. I'm sorry, it's like a funny thing to say. But like, because it's a one-to-one thing. Like, it either looks like it or it doesn't. And if it doesn't look good, then you try another thing. And then but I mean, I also think that having a subject that you love and you're copying it can keep you drawing, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's really helpful. If that's what keeps you drawing, then use as many copies as you want. And then from there, once you learn those rules, then you can figure out other things. You know? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that copying does is that it really engrosses you in a work. When you look at a drawing, you might be able to take in a small percentage of it, but when you try and copy a drawing, you are forced to read every line in the drawing as if it were a word on a page. You really have to get into what is happening with the mark making, how are individual marks strung together to create a specific look or effect, how the drawing is organized. So it's a much more intimate way of interacting with the drawing. So I think copying is really critical. That being said, I also think that it's also critical to draw from life. So you are forced to make decisions about line work on your own. You're forced to organize the visual information that you're observing. So I'm all for copying, but I would also highly recommend just working from observation as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that we talk about in the show quite a bit. It's like, we're working from reference photos. The best, the biggest opportunity for growth is going to come from when working from life, because you have to go through that whole process of translating something that's 3-dimensional into 2 dimensions. And in it, you kind of confront that part of your brain that solves problems for you. Right in the background, it's that the stuff that's running back there that you're like, I don't understand why. You just know that the walls in a hallway are parallel. You just know it. But when you actually break it down and like, how do we get there? Then it gets really complicated. And so there's so much, like I said, an opportunity for growth when you work from life. Then short of that, we're drawing from photographs. Working from a colored photograph gives you the opportunity to translate color into value, practice controlling proportions, edge work, things like that. Then working from black and white gives you an opportunity again for growth, but perhaps again just gets more limited. But if there's value in all of it. Carolyn, I want to get back to your question about the electric eraser. I think I mentioned it. It's this accurate electric eraser is what I'm using. It's in the Jerry's bundle there that you can enter the win. Claudette is asking if the art prize bundle is open to Canadians. I don't know the answer to that, but I believe the rules are posted on that page if you explore there. Let's see. So if anybody else has any questions, calling out to the audience here, feel free to throw them into the chat or in the Q&A section. I really appreciate all the questions that are coming out. This is something that happens in the show is we get questions like this that take us in all sorts of different directions that are unexpected, kind of away from just what's happening on the page. I'm kind of curious. I was able to see kind of larger versions of both of your drawings, and it's blowing my mind how far they've come along. So in just this short time, while we're chatting through all of this and solving all the world's problems through drawing. So what's top of mind for each of you as you're working now? You mentioned, Brent, that you're kind of pushing the depth between the wings.
Yeah, I think just at this point, I'm asking myself what else I think is interesting in the drawing that I haven't addressed yet. And, going back to gesture, I'm also wanting to incorporate the details that are here into the larger gesture. So I want to make sure that even though there's not a specific line that's drawn around the edge right here, there's an implied line, these beautiful sort of S curves that flow throughout the drawing. Or even relationships like this, you can see I've barely gestured this in, but this back wing, I want viewers to feel this relationship, and I want them to be able to sort of dance their way through all of these different relationships. You can see, this is implied in the photograph, but I've really tried to emphasize these kinds of relationships that you can find throughout this whole piece.
Yeah.
There's
I
dynamic
love
forces and lines that go through.
Yeah, I love that. Like as you're describing that, you're actually making marks, even though they're light. So making it explicit, here's a shape that, and they calling attention to it. That's really awesome. And so can you kind of talk about your technique for holding the pencil? That's something that I get some questions about, and then you have a particular way of doing it. You know, we all have found our way, but what's happening for you there?
Yeah, so I would say about 90% of my drawing is done with what's called the overhand grip. And and this is as opposed to the tripod grip. And one thing I really like about the overhand grip is that it doesn't engage the tip of the pencil, it engages the broad side of the pencil. So if I may just flip this up here, the tripod grip tends to produce a uniformly thick dark line, but the overhand grip, you can really produce, really beautiful kind of calligraphic lines that you can't with the tripod grip. And so I tend to do the majority of my mark making with the overhand grip. And I use the tripod grip only for areas where I want to bear down on the tip of the pencil. Because if you're applying too much pressure while using the overhand grip, the pencil lead can snap.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and Gigi, where are you at with yours right now? What's happening for your drawing?
Well, one of my pens stopped working, so that was fun.
Oh no.
Good sign. That means you're drawing.
So what I'm doing right now is I'm sort of realizing I'm going this way now, because I kind of worked on this for a little while. I started, because I just switched up to a darker brown pen, and I started working on this a little bit, and now I'm taking a different pen completely and just kind of just blocking in this, the larger wing. But I don't want to do too much because I kind of just want to keep it. I want to keep all of this going and then have sort of like a pretty little swoop. So I'm just kind of taking this other pen and just sort of shaping things, like very loosely adding things, but I don't want it to be super accurate. I'm kind of jealous that Brent chose that swan though. I'm like, oh, it would have been kind of fun, but I wouldn't have been able to get as much of it done, with the pen. I would have been too busy trying to. It would have looked too loose, and I wouldn't have known where to look,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That it's still both of you. It blows my mind how much you guys got done. Because I had a fair amount started on mine when we when we started the program, so that helped me get a long ways. But so Jackie is asking a question if we could pull in tighter on the work. It's difficult for us to hear because we all each have a lockdown camera. So I don't know if it's maybe towards the end we'll be able to bring the artwork a little bit closer. That'll be cool. I
don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I think we'll do what we can. I apologize. Yeah, it's that's the tricky part of this. So let's see. And then Ula is asking, one of the problems I have is to translate the colors into correct values in color drawing with soft pastels, for example. So they're asking, can we offer any suggestions on how to approach that problem? So that's an interesting, oh yeah, Jackie says thank you for helping to bring that in. Value is an interesting topic. We've actually been addressing it recently in the show with value relationships being a challenge because it's all about relationships, right? We don't have the ability to interpret and value in isolation. We can only understand it based on what's next to it. At least from my process, and I think one of the reasons I gravitate to charcoal more than I think any other drawing medium is that it allows me to kind of push and pull. I need to take a value relationship too far and then dial it back, and then take it too far and then dial it back, and until we find that right balance. I take more of what's called a kind of a painterly approach. Something I do when painting in oils is being able to lay down a color, scrape it off, lay on another one if I need to. And it's like I need to see it from multiple angles, if that makes sense. Not physical angles, but just to test out different value relationships, because when you're starting on a white piece of paper, any value you add to it is going to feel darker than it actually is. So you have to start building up stuff. And so part of the process is just building up material on the page, and then kind of adapting and adjusting from there. What can be helpful sometimes is to establish a lightest light and a darkest dark fairly early on. So identifying your subject where the lightest light is going to be, where the darkest dark. And sometimes that lightest light might just be the flick of light that's in the eye of your subject. And there may be only a tiny sliver of a darkest dark. And then if you can look at those values indirectly, it can help you to interpret them a little bit more effectively. So what I mean by that is, if you're trying to determine the value of one aspect of your drawing, look to the right or the left of it, fix your gaze on the other adjacent to it, but put your awareness on what you're trying to study. Because when we look directly at a form, it affects our color and value perception. It'll change that contrast. We'll see it as brighter or darker. But if you look a little offset, it can give you a better understanding of what those value relationships are, as well as squinting. So when you limit the amount of light that's coming through your eyes, it helps you to see those value relationships. So I guess those are 3 tips that I can come up with. So lightest light and darkest dark, offset observation, and squinting, I think can be both helpful. I don't know if either of you have any suggestions on value control.
Well, I mean, I guess for me, it's always just like what we were talking about before, just putting in the gesture first, and then, value control. It's so hard to explain it. I mean, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think it was a really good question. So.
Yeah, I think that in terms of translating color into value, I would highly recommend doing the painting in black and white first, and then working the colors into it. I think that can help a lot in terms of understanding the value. And also, when you are painting, take a photograph of it and then bring it into a computer and turn it into black and white. See how the values are reading. I think that's often very useful.
Yeah. That's a great. It's one of the things that we haven't talked about here, but we talk about a lot is you got to change the context of your work, or change your relationship to it. So looking at it from a distance, flipping it upside down, or holding it in a mirror. And I think a big one that's really helpful now that we have the technology is to take a photo of it, look at thumbnails, convert it, and you're just trying to get as many different layers of understanding for your work. But there's a question about surfaces, what papers we're using. So I'm using, this is a Coventry rag by Legion. I believe I can't remember what weight it is. It's either 150 or 300. I can't remember. But it's the Coventry rag. Brent, you're using the Canson Mitientes
is what I said. I don't know that
yes.
That's correct, but
yeah, I believe that sounds right to me. And then Gigi, what are you working on with your ballpoint pen?
Oh no, I have no idea.
Just paper.
No, yeah. I have paper. I have a giant. I tore off the cover years ago, and
yeah.
No idea. Sorry, that was not helpful.
Well, so when you're using ballpoint pen though, do you look at the surface? Does that impact it? I've never really worked with it enough to know.
It always impacts it. I think that, this one has a little bit more tooth. I actually kind of think it's a Canson pad that I've had for a really long time, and it has some tooth in it. I have different kinds. This is like a Stonehenge pad, and it's very smooth. Sometimes I like to draw just on bond paper, and it's really fun. It depends on how, the drag of it. I love a little bit of tooth, but I also love how it's like ice skating when you're drawing on a really super smooth bristol.
Yeah.
It's different for everybody. I like to try. I love the way it feels. It just feels differently on everything.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that analogy of the skating. All right. Oh, and then Laura Morris says you can lay a piece of wax paper over the reference to help decipher values. That's an interesting, I haven't tried that before. And I think we look like we have time for just one quick question. We only have a few minutes left. So Thomas is asking, each of you is drawing a bird with different tools. Does that impact how you draw the feathers? I think for me, I mean, with the charcoal, I can lift, I can use the eraser. I was using that a lot to create some suggestions of that and really kind of address the light through that. But yeah, I don't know about either of you, if the materials themselves are important for the feathers.
I mean, I can't shade like you guys can.
Yeah.
Everything I do is completely linear. I can only do little tick marks. I can only do cross hatching and hatching. So that's like automatically where I go to. I mean, even if I am doing, say, like, value, it's still going to be linear. So I think so the whole thing for me is going to look sketchy than what you guys are doing. You guys are using much more malleable materials.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Gigi. And in fact, I think we're an interesting spectrum right now because Scott's using charcoal, which puts out so much pigment so quickly. I'm using a more medium hardness colored pencil. So I'm putting out more pigment than Gigi is with each stroke, but not nearly as much as Scott is. And so it's an interesting spectrum, right, to see how we're developing our drawings that way. And one thing I would say too is that in terms of putting down feathers, I know this isn't media related, but when I'm looking at your work, we're all very focused on the direction of the feathers. I think more so than we're even focused on creating a realistic textured feather. And I think that becomes a really critical part of it. So you can really see the rhythm of all of these feathers going. And Gigi, I'm seeing yours kind of flowing from the head. You can almost see them flow like water down the neck and curving around. So I think that aspect of it is really important. And with details like feathers in particular, I always like to remind students that there's far less detail here than you're imagining. If you were to get close to these, I think you'd probably be surprised that there's a lot less detail here than you're imagining. And I think that's what a good drawing or painting does is, we capture the bigger forms, but we're not hyper focused on tiny details. It's just enough information to give the illusion of it. But when you look up close, you realize, it's just pigment on paper. Yeah. I think that's a great way. We're coming up on 4:30 our time here. So we're getting some great comments. Let's see. There's one quick question about the Lyra pencil from Deb. Is Lyra considered any different or better than oil-based Faber-Castell polychromos? I don't know. I'm not really familiar with oil-based drawing pencils. So they're both fantastic pencils. I use both of them frequently. They're both great pencils. The reason I tend to use Lyra more often is just because I like some of the colors better, but that is completely subjective. So they're both fantastic pencils.
That's awesome. So, all right. Well, we're coming up on the end. I don't know if we can get a little bit tighter on this or not. We thank you guys for bringing up your drawings a little bit closer. I'm just amazed at the work you both did in a short time. And I can't think of two artists that I'm so grateful that both of you were able to join to help us celebrate drawing and celebrate the show. So this has been awesome. So again, both of you, check out Brent and Gigi, follow him. Brent's got his book coming out. Check out his courses. You can find courses from both of them on artistnetwork.com. Don't forget to register to enter to win the art materials giveaway from Jerry's. So fantastic materials, including these Soho charcoals. These are really, Brent was just talking about pigment, dropping material. This midnight charcoal is intense stuff. It's good stuff. You get sketchbooks, a bunch of cool extras. So go to artistnetwork.com/artparty where you can see the full list of stuff that you can enter to win there. Thank you both for making this such an awesome hour and a half. It's been so much fun.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, 100 episodes, man. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Also, it's so great. This is really fun with you guys.
Awesome.
Yeah,
thank you. And thank you. Yes. Yeah. I'm glad you both could meet and hopefully we can do something like this again. Thank you all for watching and making the show so much fun, asking these great questions. It's really the whole point of this whole thing is just to build community around drawing. And hopefully we can advance our skills as we go. So thank you all. Don't forget to watch next Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Every Wednesday we meet for drawing together. Check out artistnetwork.com. Follow Gigi and Brent.